The evening had settled into that familiar quiet, the kind of calm that only comes after a long day. The room was warm, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the floor, while the low hum of the refrigerator was the only other sound in the house. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, the leaves brushing softly against the window, creating a rhythm that almost made the silence inside seem less heavy. The house was still, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the kind of evening where the hours stretch quietly, and you can't help but relax into the peace. But even in the stillness, there are moments that feel off, like the faintest noise that shouldn't be there. A soft knock at the door, just loud enough to break the silence but too gentle to be alarming. The kind of knock that makes you pause, wondering if you heard it right. You check the clock late, too late for visitors, but still you go to the door half expecting to find someone on the other side. But when you open it, there's no one there. The feeling of being watched lingers, and something about the quiet outside feels different. It's not fear, not yet, but it's enough to make you wonder, was it nothing or something else entirely? The next knock comes when you least expect it. The same soft, steady sound, persistent like a question waiting to be answered. And once again, there's no one when you open the door. The stillness presses in, and you start to wonder who or what is standing outside, just out of sight. As the night grows deeper, the unease doesn't fade. It lingers quietly in the corners of the room, in the silence that follows. And somehow you know that the next knock is coming. It's just a matter of time. I remember when I first moved into the house. It wasn't anything special, just a small, two-bedroom place on a quiet street. The kind of house where the paint is starting to peel at the edges and the floors creak in all the right places. But it was mine, and it was a welcome change after months of living in a cramped apartment. The neighborhood was calm, peaceful, almost too quiet at times. There was a park nearby where children played, and the occasional car would pass by, but it felt like the perfect retreat from the noise of the city. I'd spent the first few days unpacking, settling into the space, and getting a feel for the house. I liked it. It had character, it felt lived in, and I was beginning to feel comfortable. The house had a strange charm to it. The way the windows let in just enough light, the thick old curtains that fluttered softly when the breeze came through, and the little creaks from the floors as the house settled into the evening. It was quiet at night, almost too quiet, but I found solace in that. After years of living in busy, noisy environments, this stillness was welcome. The first few nights passed without incident, the house and I getting used to each other. I'd lie in bed with the window cracked open, the soft hum of the night outside drifting in, the sound of distant traffic, and the occasional owl breaking the silence. I thought I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in a long time. But then one night the quiet was broken. I had just gotten comfortable in bed, the room dark except for the soft light of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. The house was still, the kind of silence that wraps itself around you, making the smallest sound feel loud. I had already settled under the blankets, my book resting on the nightstand beside me. My eyes were heavy, the kind of tiredness that comes from a long day of work. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it, a soft knock at the door. It was so quiet that I almost dismissed it, assuming I had imagined it. But then it came again, 1, 2, 3 taps, light, almost gentle, as if someone was trying not to disturb the quiet of the night. I sat up in bed, my heart picking up just a little, but I wasn't scared, not yet. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone needing something, or just stopping by for an unexpected visit. The thought felt odd, but not alarming. As I got out of bed, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor, and walked to the door. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see someone standing outside. But no one was there. I opened the door slightly, my heart still racing from the sudden interruption, and looked down the darkened hallway. The porch was empty, the street lamps casting soft pools of light on the sidewalk, but there was no sign of anyone. The night was still. I stood there for a moment, confused, wondering if I had imagined the knock or if it had come from somewhere else. Maybe the wind, the old wood settling in the walls. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing there, waiting. I closed the door and went back to bed, trying to ignore the unease that had started to creep in. I told myself it was nothing. It was probably a mistake, just a random noise. The house had old pipes, old floors, and sometimes it made noises, sounds that didn't belong but didn't mean anything. I turned over, trying to get comfortable again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The silence in the house felt heavier now, and the small sounds, the creaks of the floor, the distant hum of the fridge seemed louder than before. I kept hearing the soft rattle of the window, the wind gently pushing against the glass, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard that knock again. It was faint, but it was there, like it had been burned into my memory. I tried to push the thoughts away and finally fell asleep, though not peacefully. The next morning, I told myself it had just been my imagination, that I had overthought it. But that evening, as I settled back into bed, the knock came again. At first, it was just a tap, like last time, soft, delicate. But this time it was followed by a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood. I froze, my heart instantly pounding in my chest. It was louder this time, more deliberate. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, straining to hear. The knocking came again, accompanied by that same dragging noise, as though something or someone was standing just outside, waiting for me to respond. I didn't move, I didn't know what to do. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I couldn't make myself get up. The sound was so faint, so unnatural in the stillness of the house, that I began to wonder if it was real. Maybe it was just the wind or the house creaking, or maybe I was hearing things. But then the sound came again. This time I could swear it was right outside my bedroom door, faintly scraping against the floor, a slow, deliberate movement. I sat up in bed, listening, my body rigid with fear. The house was so still, so quiet, that every sound felt magnified, like it was pressing in on me. I finally got up, my legs shaky, and opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. The same empty, quiet hallway. I checked every room, nothing. But the air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. I walked through the entire apartment, looking into every corner, checking under the furniture, wondering what I was missing. But there was no one there, there was nothing there. For the next few nights, the knock came again, always at the same time, always with that same soft, unsettling tap. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but it was enough to unsettle me. I tried to ignore it, tried to go back to sleep, but the unease never left. The house felt colder now, as if something was waiting for me to acknowledge it. And when I finally did, when I opened the door expecting to find someone or something outside, it was always just the silence, just the empty, quiet night. I never found out who or what was knocking at my door. The knocks stopped as mysteriously as they had started, and the house felt quieter, emptier somehow. But even now, when the night is still and the house is silent, I hear the faintest sound, the tap of a knock, a soft scrape against the wood. And I wonder if it's just my mind or if something is still waiting for me to open the door. I had been living in the house for about 6 months when I first noticed something was off. It was a small, unassuming cottage tucked away on the edge of town, the kind of place people rarely visit unless they have a reason to be there. When I moved in, it felt like a peaceful retreat, quiet, with a small garden in the front and a view of the woods in the back. The walls were old and the wood floors creaked beneath my feet, but it had character. I enjoyed the solitude. I had always preferred it that way. The house had a certain charm, though, something that made it feel like it had lived 1,000 quiet lives before mine. I was comfortable, safe even. But that was before the night everything changed. It started with the small things, the noises you don't think much of at first. I would hear the creaking of the stairs late at night or the faint rattle of the windows as the wind picked up. The house was old, and I told myself it was nothing more than that, just the building settling, nothing more. But then it happened one evening while I was cooking dinner. The air had that cool, almost crisp feeling to it, the kind of evening where you can still keep the windows open and the breeze smells fresh and clean. As I was preparing a simple meal, nothing special, when I heard it, a faint tap on the window. At first, I thought it was just a bird or perhaps a tree branch tapping against the glass. The wind had been picking up, and the trees outside always made a quiet rattle against the house. But then it came again. A soft, deliberate tap. It was too rhythmic to be the wind, and it wasn't the kind of sound you would expect from a branch. I set the knife down on the counter, my eyes scanning the room, the faint evening light from the window casting shadows on the walls. I waited for the sound to come again, unsure of what I was feeling. A growing sense of unease mixed with the creeping awareness that something wasn't quite right. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The yard was empty, bathed in the soft light from the street lamps, casting long shadows over the grass. There was no one there, no figure, no movement, just the quiet stillness of the evening. I shook my head, thinking it must have been a trick of the wind, but a part of me wasn't convinced. There was something about the way the sound had come, soft but deliberate, that left me unsettled. The days that followed were peaceful enough, but that feeling lingered. I would hear the same soft tapping on the window from time to time, always in the evening, always when the house was quiet. It wasn't the wind, I knew that much. It was a sound too controlled, too purposeful to be the result of any natural cause. I started checking the windows more often, drawing the curtains back to see if anyone was standing outside. But every time I found nothing, no sign of anyone, no footprints in the yard. No movement in the shadows. It was as though the sound existed, but the source never did. Then one night it happened again. I was sitting on the couch watching the faint flicker of the television when I heard it, the tap. It was the same rhythmic, deliberate sound. But this time it didn't come from the window. It came from the door. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as the sound came again, tap, 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 so gentle yet so clear, as if someone were standing just outside waiting for me to answer. I stood up, my legs heavy, and walked toward the door. As I didn't know what to expect, but I had to check. I had to know. I opened the door slowly, but the porch was empty. The street outside was quiet, with only the soft hum of distant traffic. No one was there. I stood there for a few moments, feeling the weight of the stillness in the air. It felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath. I checked the yard and the surrounding area, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The world outside was still, the way it always was when I came home at night. The only thing out of place was that feeling in my chest, the lingering sense that I wasn't alone. I closed the door and locked it, the sound of the deadbolt clicking echoing through the house. But the feeling didn't fade. It lingered, thick in the air. The house seemed quieter somehow, as if the walls were listening. I returned to the couch and tried to shake the feeling, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the tapping came again that night, soft and distant, like a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. The front door had been slightly ajar. I could have sworn I had locked it the night before, but when I checked, there it was, barely cracked open, just enough for someone to slip in unnoticed. I checked the entire house, every room, every window, but there were no signs of anyone having entered. No footprints, no disturbances, just the same quiet emptiness as always. I couldn't explain it. I had locked the door, and yet it had been opened. The unease that had settled in me now grew into something heavier, something more persistent. A few days later, I found something else, something I didn't want to find. It was a single shoe, an old one, lying in the middle of my yard facing the house. It looked worn, like it had been there for years, but it was the kind of shoe that didn't belong, the kind that wasn't mine. It wasn't until I went to pick it up that I noticed the dirt around it, fresh soil, disturbed just recently, as though it had been buried there before being uncovered. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the yard, but there was nothing. The house was still. The air was still. It was as if everything had been waiting for me to notice it, to piece it together. I didn't stay in the house much longer after that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had been there all along, waiting in the shadows, leaving no trace behind but the faint tapping at the door and the single shoe in the yard. Every creak in the house, every soft sound of the wind, every tap against the window or the door now felt like a reminder. I never figured out who had been leaving these signs or why they wanted me to notice. But the house still stands, quiet and still, waiting for the next person to move in and hear those same knocks, those same whispers that echo from the walls. And sometimes when the wind picks up, I still hear it, soft, rhythmic, deliberate, the tap, tap, tap of something just outside, leaving no trace. The house had always felt safe. I had moved in just a few months ago, eager for a change of scenery after a few years in a busy city apartment. The house was small, nothing fancy, but it had the kind of charm I'd been looking for: high ceilings, wooden floors, and enough windows to let in the sunlight. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people say hello when they pass by and kids still play outside. It felt right. It felt like a place where I could finally breathe after years of living in the chaos of the city. At first, everything was normal. The days were calm, the evenings peaceful. I'd spend my nights cooking dinner, reading, or sometimes just sitting by the window watching the world go by. The house was always quiet, and I liked it that way. The creaks of the floors, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the occasional rattle of the windows when the wind picked up, it was all part of the rhythm of living in an older house. It was comforting in its own way. But then one evening, the quiet was interrupted. It was late, too late for any visitors, and I was just finishing up a book when I heard it, a knock at the door. At first, I thought I had imagined it, the noise too soft to be real. But then it came again, tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the kind of knock I expected, not the quick, hurried knock of someone trying to get your attention, but a soft, deliberate tap, 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 like someone was knocking just to make sure I heard it. I sat there for a moment, the sound lingering in the air. Maybe it was a neighbor, I thought, but it was late, too late for that. I walked to the door, my steps slow, as if the quiet of the house had seeped into my own movements. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was no one. The porch was empty, the night still and dark. I opened the door, half expecting to find a prankster, maybe a kid, running away, but there was nothing, no one, just the empty street, the faint light of the street lamps casting long shadows on the pavement. I stood there for a moment, confused. I could still hear the faint echo of the knock in my mind. Maybe it was the wind, I thought, or maybe I was just imagining things. I closed the door and locked it, returning to the living room, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. Something in the air felt off, like the silence had shifted in a way I couldn't explain. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, something had been outside, just beyond my reach. The next day I thought nothing of it. It had just been a weird moment, I told myself. But that night the knock came again. It was the same soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I was sitting in the same spot on the couch, reading a book, when it sounded again. I froze, the book slipping from my hands. My pulse quickened, and I turned slowly toward the door. I had just heard it, I was sure of it. The knocking was real, and it was coming from outside. I got up, my feet cold against the floor, and I walked toward the door again, this time with a sense of unease creeping up my spine. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to see who or what was out there. But I did anyway, pulling the door open a little wider, hoping to find something that would make sense of it. But the porch was empty again. No one was there. No movement, nothing. The air outside felt colder, though. And as I stood there, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a quiet chill running down my spine. The wind had picked up, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, but it was the silence around me that felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was nearby, watching. I quickly shut the door and locked it again, my heart racing, but the unease wouldn't leave. It had settled in deep in my chest, and I could feel it every time I looked at the door, every time the house was still. I spent the next few days second-guessing myself. Had I imagined it? Was I hearing things? But then that night the knock came again. This time it was louder, more insistent. It wasn't just a tap anymore. It was a thud, a heavy sound that made the walls rattle ever so slightly. I stood frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. The knock wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from inside. I felt a wave of cold wash over me as though the temperature in the room had dropped. My heart thudded in my chest as I stood there, staring at the door, unable to move. The knocking came again, louder this time, from just beyond the wall. I couldn't place it. The walls weren't thick enough to mask the sound of someone knocking from the other side. But the thing that made it worse, what made it impossible to ignore, was that the knock didn't come from the door. It came from deeper in the house. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway, right beneath the staircase. It was as though someone was knocking from inside the walls, trying to get my attention. I didn't want to check. I didn't want to find out what was causing it, but the fear that held me in place was stronger than my reluctance. I walked slowly toward the hallway, the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet almost too loud in the silence. As I reached the hallway, the knocking stopped, but I didn't feel any relief. The air felt thick, heavy, as though something was waiting just behind the door to the basement. I couldn't explain it, but something inside me knew that whatever was causing the sound was not normal, not of this world. I stood there, staring at the door, my mind racing with every possible explanation, but none of them made sense. I opened the door to the basement slowly, the smell of dust and mildew wafting up to meet me. The stairs descended into darkness. I couldn't see a thing, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I waited a moment, holding my breath, hoping to hear something that would explain the noise. But all I heard was the faint rattle of the old pipes behind the walls. I stepped down onto the first step, my feet heavy against the wooden tread, the sound of my breathing growing louder in my ears. As I reached the bottom, my flashlight caught something, a shadow moving in the corner of the basement. But there was no one there. I never figured out what caused the knocking. I spent the night in my living room, staring at the door, the windows, and the dark corners of the house. The knocks never came again, but I could feel the house was different now, like it was holding a secret, one I wasn't supposed to know. When I left the next morning, the silence seemed louder than ever, but the fear still lingered in the corners of my mind. And every time I close my eyes now, I wonder if something is still waiting to knock, this time from within the walls. There's something about the quiet of night that makes us more aware of the things we can't explain. The small sounds that don't belong, the knocks that echo in the dark, leaving us wondering if we're truly alone. These stories remind us that the fear we feel in the silence isn't always imagined. Sometimes it lingers in the space between what we see and what we can't, waiting for us to hear it, to feel it, to acknowledge that something is out there just beyond our reach. I know how it feels, the hesitation, the uncertainty when you hear a knock and open the door only to find nothing but the empty air. It's unsettling, isn't it, the not knowing? The small moments when the world feels too quiet, too still. And in those moments, it's easy to wonder, was it nothing, or was something or someone standing just out of sight? As the night wraps around you and the house falls back into its familiar rhythm, remember that the silence isn't always empty. Sometimes the knocking, the sounds, the presence is waiting just beyond the door. If you ever hear it again, don't be afraid to listen. Some mysteries, after all, are meant to be left in the dark. But for now, let the quiet be your company. Rest knowing that tomorrow may be a little less strange, or perhaps it will be even more so. Either way, I'll be here waiting with more stories whispered in the stillness of the night. Good night.